You ready to talk about our favorite topic, Dietmar?
Yes, Bonnie and I love governance.
Well, I hate the word governance. It's such an ugly
It,
word.
does it remind you of government? There's a distinction between governance and government, right, Bonnie? I think it's very different.
But
So we
it,
talk
it's
about
it,
governance, not government. Just to be very clear. Yeah.
it's not the flashy new thing. It's the IT standard that has to be in place to make all the flashy new things work. But boy, does it get overlooked. And I think people shy away from it because of that word.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can fill it with life today to make it more tangible for everyone. So thanks for joining. I'm going to wait one more minute and then we get going. Still see people joining in via the link, so we'll just wait a few more moments and then we get rolling. All right, it's 2 minutes after, so let's get going. So first of all, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you in this 1 hour seminar where we're going to cover a topic that is very near and dear to both Bonnie and me. We're going to talk about Atlassian governance. A quick word of introduction. My name is Dietmar Doerschlag. I'm obviously here with Valiantys. I'm a business transformation consultant. I work exclusively in the Atlassian ecosystem across multiple products. I do a lot of work in Jira service management, Jira, Confluence, and obviously in that work, we always talk about governance. My background is in really 25 plus years in IT, mainly in IT project, program, and portfolio management. And of course, in that role, I always had to wrestle with how do we actually sustain the solutions that we build? And obviously, this is where governance comes into play. So, Bonnie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. And it's funny how we come from such completely different backgrounds. My name is Bonnie Beyer, and I'm an engagement director with Valiantys. I've been a consultant for about 6 years now in the Atlassian and Agile ecosphere. But my background, really, I spent 20 some years in avionics, engineering, doing software systems engineering, a little bit of firmware engineering, project management, engineering management, back to project management, back to engineering management, doing the full gamut there. And then they threw me over the wall to shared services. And they threw me over the wall because they wanted somebody that engineering could trust, because engineering never trusts trusses never trusts the shared services, right? But they wanted me to manage the agile transformation and the Atlassian tools modernization, and that brought me into a whole new world. And I had so much fun doing that for my company that's when I became a consultant in 2019 to help other companies do it. So
Great. And you have one piece that really made you famous, you told me, that has something to do with GPS, right?
oh,
Aircrafts, right? Yeah.
well, I worked on GPS, but I think my mic drop moment is that I wrote the software that lands the 737.
And
So
that makes me feel very safe next time I go on a plane. Yeah. So it's always a pleasure to work with Bonnie. She has so many years of experience, and I always continue to learn from her. So we are obviously with Valiantys. For those of you who don't know Valiantys, we are dedicated to the Atlassian ecosystem. There are 600 plus of us globally. We are really the first global partner with team members in Southeast Asia, many folks in Australia, in Europe, in North America, and we are dedicated to Atlassian ecosystem. We also have a full stack development practice, and we just really enjoy working in that ecosystem. So today we're going to talk about governance. As we said, as we opened up this webinar, the term is not very sexy. Going back to 2009, when I joined a large public sector organization here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, where I'm currently located. This was truth be told, one of the most innovative mass transit agencies in North America, a fourth largest one by ridership. And I came in the role in this organization as a senior project manager back then, 16 years ago. And the then CIO interviewed me and asked me, so what do you know about governance? And that was a great question to ask me as someone who comes into project management. What do I know about governance? And as I then progressed in my career and was privileged to build up a pretty large IT project office, of course, I was always confronted with this really important topic about decision making, sustaining the solutions that we're building together. And this is really why Bonnie and I deeply care about governance, because we work a lot with clients, bringing them to that go live date. But then our role is to also position them to sustain the solution through a governance framework so it's all in good shape. And this is really what we want to cover today. So we want to talk about what is governance, why should you care working in the Atlassian ecosystem about governance. And we want to talk about how do you actually get it started. If you don't have it in place yet, how do you actually set it up? And then Bonnie will take you through a demonstration. We do a number of governance assessments, helping our clients implement governance frameworks, and she's going to show you some of the very tangible artifacts that she is using in that context. So let's start with a definition. Governance is not government. Of course, no government could function without having governance in place, right? But if you look at the definition on the screen, governance is really first and foremost about making decisions and also, yes, enforcing those decisions. And today, of course, we're talking about governance in the context of the Atlassian ecosystem, but you would be familiar with governance in your personal life as well. If you're part of a sports club, a church, any society, you are obviously always operating under governance model, the terms of reference, the decision-making process. And really in the Atlassian ecosystem, it's no different. So this slide lists a few examples, right? When we put the system in place, there needs to be a framework in place how you control the changes that are applied to that ecosystem. And this is, of course, really important in the Atlassian ecosystem because you're constantly developing that platform further. You're introducing changes to it. It could be just related to your change control board, right? You're dealing with infrastructure changes and, of course, application changes. Now, there are three pillars on this slide that we want to talk about. As business consultants, we always look at the trifecta of three things. We look at people, we look at the practices, we sometimes also refer to this, of course, as processes, and then we look at the tools. And it's really in that order. The first thing when we work with our clients is we always look at the people. Who is actually using the tools? That's the most important thing because people really drive the processes, right? We have to start with the people. So in governance, it's no different. We have to really look at the people involved in governance first. And then the second thing is we have to look at the processes. What should really good, solid governance processes be? And then lastly, of course, very important, we need to look at the systems, the tools in place, right, that allow that decision making. So that's one thing that we really want to emphasize. The first bullet here, I want to share maybe my personal experience and that Bonnie also chime in. I worked in large organizations. I worked for a very large multinational building materials company, 70,000 employees. And then I moved into a mass transit agency with about 8,000 employees. And in that organization, we had actually a parent company and we had organizational subsidiaries. operating entities, and each of those entities had their own management boards. They had their own finance departments, their own human resource departments. And when we, in my PMO, came in and we implemented solution systems that spanned the entire enterprise, it was really important that everyone from the various entities was involved in the decision-making process. They all were involved. Now, if you have an organization with 8,000 employees, of course, you need to think this through how representative decision-making works. But the important point here is people need to be represented. Their voices need to be heard as you're setting up a governance framework. Bonnie, anything from your background, your experience that comes to mind on that first point that I made?
Yeah, and it's funny because when I got thrown over that wall to shared services at that avionics company, one of the things we had was what we called the ALM Change Control Board, and that was our representative governance. And I really didn't know anything about IT governance over tools. I was an engineer. Just make it work for me because I have products I have to deliver to my clients. But everything I learned about the proper way to manage that system came from that group, from that change control board, and understanding that we have a representative from the flight control system group, and we have a representative from the flight management and from GPS and from firmware. And so we had an understanding of all of the different ways we were impacting those different organizations, as well as the different roles. It's not just representing the different groups, but also project managers versus systems engineers versus department managers versus the support personnel, so that you can actually understand the different use cases. So, yeah, go ahead.
Very important. Yeah. The second point there is holistic system thinking. I mean, we all know that no system ever operates in isolation. That's just not happening. It's always integrated with other systems. And that's very true in the Atlassian ecosystem. Of course, in the Atlassian ecosystem, you have Jira, Confluence, Jira Service Management, maybe Rovo, Loom, Bitbucket, and others. They all need to be looked at holistically. You cannot look at a governance model only in the context of JSM if you also have connected Atlassian apps. But it also goes, of course, with respect to connected applications via APIs, your line of business apps, finance, human resources, etc. So a governance board for Atlassian cannot only look at systems in isolation. You need to apply a holistic approach. And the last bullet here is very important, I know, to both Bonnie and me, and that is an intentional change management process. So when we say change management, of course, you might be thinking, well, you're referring to IT change management, right? The process of assessing changes and only implementing approved changes. Yes, absolutely. That's what we're talking about. But we're also talking about the people side of changes, right? That is equally important besides the system stuff. So whenever you implement a change from a governance perspective, you really have to think through, well, is the organization ready to embrace that change, right? Is the organization, how big is that impact of the change that you're deploying? And you need to think about the people that will be receiving that change. So that's what we also refer to when we say intentional change management. So why should you care? Behind me on my bookshelf is a book that I cracked up laughing when I was reading it. And it's a book that is called The Phoenix Project, which if you're in IT, you might know. And it is a story of DevOps written with a lot of humor, but it reflects real life in IT, where sometimes things really, really go wrong. Why? Because of the absence of governance. They rolled in changes that were not really thought through, and everything blew up. So they really did not do a good job in the development lifecycle, right? They had no gating process. Things were just implemented and then it blew up. Real life example, I took a GSM client live earlier this year, and it was heavily based on automations. The solution worked 100%. Our engagement closed. A month later, we got a frantic phone call from the CIO. Why? Because their newly hired Jira admin had deleted a custom field, which was the foundation for all the automations we built, and the solution completely broke. Not a good thing to happen, right? So you should really care about governance to avoid those pitfalls and those catastrophes. The second aspect is that, of course, governance needs to be in place to improve that executive visibility, right? They need to be aware of what changes you are implementing that affects intended business outcomes, schedule, scope dependencies, right? And lastly, you need to improve operational visibility and collaboration, right? If you don't have governance in place, you cannot really accomplish that. So Bonnie will laugh about this slide, and Kristen, who is hosting this webinar as well, because they know that I am very passionate about not only cracking on a computer all day long, but being out and about and really enjoying the outdoors through mountain climbing. And I want to use this personal example to make a point. So this is somebody's garage, and I say this is not my garage. Somebody who organizes their mountain gear in that way. And now tomorrow they go on a big climb, and just imagine they miss out on a critical piece of equipment. That could be in mountain climbing a fatal mistake. And it means that you're not coming home that evening, right? So for me, that slide, that picture, in a humorous way, represents the absence of governance, which of course means chaos. So this is looking very different. So on the right picture, this is yours truly a few years ago, me rock climbing on one of my first outings with my dad. And the picture on the left, that's off the internet, but this is someone who has duly planned out what they should bring on their journey. You see that it's well organized, well thought out, prioritized, and that climbing party left nothing to chance. So you translate that into IT governance, right? That to me is a wonderful governance model. It doesn't have to be perfectly lined up like that, but you see that somebody really thought through what they need to not only reach the summit, translating successful go live, but they make it back safe down to base camp. And this is really where governance comes in. So this is a little example from my own life. Bonnie, I'm sure you have another one from your life experience.
I was just thinking, why do we care? Because we might fall down the mountain. And really, that's not a bad analogy, because why do we care? Because it costs money. It costs us a lot of money. Bad governance typically leads to outages, or leads to lost opportunities, leads to ineffective communication, or it leads to garbage in, garbage out types of reports that lead to bad decision making because they don't have the information needed to make a good decision. So it costs us money. That's why we care.
Exactly. So on that vein, Valiantys commissioned a report, and we call it the hidden cost of data chaos. Now, how does this relate to governance? Well, very often the absence of governance results in no good data to make decisions based off of, right? So if you have bad governance, you have bad data, right? And you see on this graph here some of the results of bad data, right? Brand reputation. Let me focus on this. Let's just say we implement a Jira service desk. I work a lot in that space. And now people go to that service desk, external clients, to rely on receiving services from you. And now you make an uncoordinated change, and things blow up and things don't work any longer. Your brand reputation might suffer. It's just one example, right? But there are also other aspects that we need to look at. And we refer to this as not only cost reduction opportunities that are lost, but also opportunities that you're losing out. An example would be if you're so focused on cleaning up the mess, firefighting. You might be losing out on growing your market, right? On really opening up new market potentials. So governance is really, really important. And this report brings this out. That report is available to you free of charge, of course, and was shared with you in the chat, so you can read up on this at your own leisure. But this is a point we wanted to make, is that bad governance means bad data. And there is really sometimes an underappreciated aspect of not having good data. So this is, Bonnie, we call this the Jira Hall of Fame, right? Not a good slide. That workflow was captured in a real life Jira instance. Complicated, costly to build, even more costly to sustain. So you see a few examples here that could happen in your Atlassian instance, right? Many issue types now, of course, called work item types, right? Thousands of custom fields. No governance around the creation of new or the deletion of existing custom fields. Thousands of workflows. Endless number of statuses, right? If you're familiar in the ecosystem, you know schemes, workflow schemes, work type schemes, screen schemes, permission schemes, notification schemes, thousands of schemes. And maybe the worst, too many cooks in the kitchen, right? So if you have anything like that, and of course it doesn't have to be that dramatic, we say you need governance. And this is why we are passionate about holding this seminar, this webinar. Now, Bonnie and I don't want to come across as too negative. We have to, of course, talk a little bit about the challenges that the absence of governance brings. But fear not, of course, we're going to talk about what the solution is in some of the slides coming up here. So here are another few wild west symptoms. Bonnie, you want to pick up on any of those from your experience working in the ecosystem?
Well, it's very rare that I see a system that doesn't have some aspect of problem areas, but if all of the different Jira spaces, they're called spaces now, have their own work type schemes and their own workflow schemes, one-off, then it's going to be impossible to manage those systems appropriately. If you have dozens of different issue types, people are not going to know which issue type they're supposed to use for which type of work. They think they know, but each team is using them differently. So you don't have consistent reporting. You think you're giving yourself more information, but you don't. I love it when you see multiple versions of a done status that mean the same thing. Done, complete, closed, finished. I recently actually saw the done, and the done status in a system. And I mean, it's not just done, it's done. What about you?
I like it. I like it. Well, my recent example is, of course, sorry, I'm in Canada, and in Canada we spell cancelled with two L's because I think it's the British English spelling, and in the US it's spelled cancelled with one L. But another example was, which actually just came up yesterday, is that in one of my client instances, they have a workflow status called in progress and another status called work in progress. And that's why one SLA was not working correctly, because an SLA condition was time to first contact was configured to only pick up the in progress status, not the work in progress status, because different workflows use different statuses. So here's a cleanup opportunity, right? It's a very tangible real life example. So let's talk about, we need to shift to the good news. How do we now actually stand up Atlassian governance? And you can call this a governance board, a governance committee, a governance steering group. The terminology that you use in your organizational context is completely irrelevant. You can call it whatever you want. So who is actually involved in standing up a governance model? Well, here are the people that we think should be included. It starts with a product owner. Bonnie and I are both big proponents of an iterative, agile delivery model. I think Bonnie pronounces agile differently, but it's the same thing. Okay. I have a joke about this all the time. In Canada, we call it agile, and Bonnie calls it something completely different. Anyways, an iterative delivery model. And of course, you have a product owner, right? Somebody needs to own the Atlassian ecosystem. And could there be multiple owners? Yes, there could be a Jira owner, a Confluence owner, a GSM owner, but you need to have product ownership, and they need to be included in that board. And then who are your core system experts that need to be involved in governance decision making? Of course, your administrators, right? Your product admins, Jira, Confluence, GSM admins, certainly your organizational administrators, right? They need to be involved. And then you have some integration experts, right? People who are responsible for interfaces, right? People who are maybe responsible for marketplace apps. They need to be consulted in a holistic system thinking approach. And then we talked about representative decision making, right? So if you work in a larger organization, maybe with multiple departments, I'm thinking Jira Service Management used for enterprise service management. I'm working on with clients where JSM is used in 25 different departments. You need to have representatives from the business areas that are impacted by, as the heavy user, the system that we are governing, right? So what do they do? And Bonnie will show you this in a few minutes with concrete examples. So the first thing that they do is they establish the terms of reference, right? Like every group that gets established, they need to define why they exist, and they need to establish the terms of reference. And this is what we, of course, refer to when we say, what is the vision? What are the specific tangible goals and practices, right? What is their area of responsibility, right? What do they have control over? That's what this group first and foremost needs to establish. And then what they also do is they identify, implement, document the supported system Jira architecture design, right? So this gets very involved. Bonnie will talk about a slide about this in a few minutes. You cannot, at a whim, make architecture changes. It needs to be well thought out. If you're making changes, God forbid, to the issue hierarchy without thinking this through, you can break a lot of things, right? So that board, that governance group really owns the architecture in the system and needs to thoroughly think through any changes that are being made. And what does that group also do? They approve, upon a thorough review, changes before they are implemented. So you are very obviously familiar with concept such as a change control board, a change advisory board. You really need that in the Atlassian ecosystem. I give an example and then asking Bonnie for one example. Very often in the Atlassian ecosystem, it's not just one configuration element that comes into play. It's very often a combination of many different ones: screens, fields, automations, workflow configurations, right? Groups, permissions are just a few that come to mind. And if you make a change in any of those elements, the solution can break. I gave an example with a bad, horrible example with a key custom field that was the basis for automation to be deleted, and then the solution broke. I worked with one client, HelloFresh. I can name who they are because I think they even advertising that they're using Atlassian. They have GSM in place in 16 countries. And they had a well thought out governance process in place where if you required a new custom field to be created or changed, you had to submit, yes, from a GSM portal, a request that was routed to their system administrators. And they analyzed it, and only upon the analysis did they implement that change. And I thought that was pretty well thought out. Might sound like bureaucratic overburden, but if you think about anything that can go haywire, if you don't do that, you see the reasoning behind it. Bonnie, any example from your work that comes
Yeah,
to mind?
yeah, and the examples can be from, how the tool breaks, but the examples can also be from how the end users are using it incorrectly. And so the example I was thinking of is where one of my clients, they implemented the Jira hierarchy for the work items, the work breakdown structure, but then they implemented parallel issue types for the value structure to implement strategic goals down to objectives down to team goals. And so they had this parallel issue type hierarchy. And what they didn't think about is how people would make mistakes and they would link their stories rather than linking them up to the Jira epics, they would link them up to their objectives. And then some of those Jira epics might have been linked up to some of the strategic goals rather than up to the initiatives. And so their hierarchy ended up being broken. And when they would go to their advanced plans, their advanced roadmaps plans, they wouldn't see the work breakdown structure that they were expecting to see because things were linked up inappropriately. And so by introducing this parallel hierarchy, they didn't account for the end user support and the auditing that they would have to perform to make sure that they weren't breaking that link up of the work. So
Thanks for that. Okay, so how do you get started? I think it starts with, first of all, looking at what the goals in your organization are. And there are some of them listed at the center here. Scalable growth. Let me use an example. I was privileged to work with a Canadian-based global software company that is now scaling up to be really go global. They want to operate in multiple markets. So they brought us in to help them with an analysis and recommendation how they should set up JSM to really be scalable up to a global enterprise, right? Global operation. So governance in that context, of course, the governance goals would be different from my other client, which went live on JSM 2 weeks ago. They are a New York Stock Exchange listed financial services company. They implemented JSM only for internal support. So what do they have? They have a heavy focus on SOX compliance because they are dealing with financial records. So their governance goals are more driven from visible controls, which is, of course, different from scalable growth, right? Maybe you work in an organization that's more focused on knowledge sharing, right? Maybe you are more in a, I don't know, product management organization, marketing organization, design organization. Maybe then your governance goals are a little bit different. Regardless of what your goals are, you really need to have the governance group start with creating a governance vision. And there is this fine balance. And I just cut the video on that topic actually, that you need to consider. Yes, you need to have a balance between the enterprise goals, but you can't be too rigid, right? Because every methodology that's too rigid and people hate it, people will try to circumvent it. That's my experience. So I think it's important that you find this healthy balance between, yes, enterprise goals, but making sure people really buy in, they really understand it, otherwise they might circumvent it. Bonnie, any thoughts on that?
yeah, it's a fine line. What has to
Tough
be
one.
common versus what can be unique, and understanding that architecture of your system will help you make those decisions.
Yeah, very important. Okay, so I'm gonna hand it over to Bonnie now. Bonnie's gonna talk about some important architectural decisions. Of course, Bonnie sharing, and you can grab the screen. She's going to talk about some architectural decisions, of course, related to governance. And then she's going to walk you through a demo of how some of those governance artifacts look like. So Bonnie, take it away.
Yeah, so one of the first things I do when I start working with the client is I ask them, what is a Jira space? Jira projects, Jira space. Oh, what does a Jira space represent in your company? And I get lots of answers. The right answer, there is no right answer. They could be representing a team. It could represent a department. It could represent a product line or a product or and there are, I said there's no wrong answer. It could represent an initiative. That's a wrong answer. The truth is you want your Jira spaces to represent something that's long lasting, not time bound. An initiative is an issue type. It is not a Jira space. But if you don't have a common definition of what a Jira space represents, a well understood, thought out, this is what our Jira spaces represent. This space category means this, and this space category means that. Then you probably have a wild, wild west system. And so some of the decisions you're trying to make for those Jira spaces are what is the hierarchy of our system, our work breakdown structure, and what is the scope of responsibility for how we govern that system? What is our Jira configuration structure? What do the spaces represent, and how have we laid out our data in those systems? What are our portfolio and product management requirements? And then what are the customizations that we need to recognize for our teams, as well as the integrations? Cloud makes it really possible for us to do all kinds of great customizations and integrations and automations. And so the more we can build a common system for our different project space categories, the more we can take advantage of those automations across multiple teams, multiple product lines, and multiple departments. And so this diagram here, this is just an example of how we might walk through that decision making of, for example, if we were wanting to integrate with a Jira line system, we would want to have our teams and our release trains or our programs set up with their options of where do we want our Jira epics or features and stories in the same project where we're using a team field for the different boards, or do we want our epics to be in a single project and have a single Jira project space for each of the teams? And so we don't have to use the team field for the different boards. And there's impacts, pros and cons associated with that decision making, but we need to make a decision. So Valiantys has seen it in both sides, so we can give you some of those pros and cons and some of those impacts. But then you need to make the decision as which way do we want to go? You don't want to do both, because if you're integrating with the Jira line system, that's just not going to work very well. Or if you're representing all of that work in your Jira system and you're using a Tempo SPM solution or some other solution for your portfolio level, you'll also still want to think about how is that enterprise work captured? Is it all going to be in the same Jira space for that portfolio? And then you're going to be using Teams fields for all of that. Are you going to have the enterprise work broken out separately? And so those kinds of questions are fundamental foundations. And then you want to get into all the details of workflows and fields after that. But that's where we start. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into a demo here. And so I got the link already opened, but one of the things that I find with a lot of our clients is they don't have their governance, and by governance, I mean their intentional design of their systems, how they support the system and the end users, how they train the end users and their knowledge base, and how they manage change management. They don't have all of that in a centralized location. Some of it might be in some admin's head, some of it might be on somebody's share drive, some of it might be in these various hard drives or Confluence spaces. But to pull it all together into a centralized location is a great way to protect yourselves from your subject matter experts winning the lottery and leaving the company. And so we've prepared a template that would help support that. You can move all of your existing documentation over into it, or if you don't have that documentation, then you can actually start building your good governance here. And so our homepage for our Atlassian Governance Board is really where we have that mission statement that Dietmar was just talking about. And we talk about how we operate as a team, who are the team members, what are their responsibilities, and what is the scope of our governance? What products are we actually managing? And so that's really just your homepage, but you'll see that the space is broken down into these 3 different categories. Our practices, we actually have our Atlassian administration section where we capture all of our admin activities, and our knowledge base. And so I start with the easy one, the knowledge base. And I say it's easy because really all we want to capture here is our company specific documentation. We don't want to recreate all of the Atlassian documentation or recreate all of the Tempo documentation. Or a lot of the vendors, they have great knowledge bases and they maintain that. You don't want to maintain the Atlassian how to do JQL searching or how to build a appropriate dashboard. You want to let Atlassian maintain that. But you do want to have your company specific decision making, like how do we manage our sprint naming? How do we set up our advanced plans dashboards for our program management reviews? How do we what are our Confluence page templates that are specific to our organization? Or what is our labels taxonomy? And then you also want to have a knowledge base that's about your Jira configuration, just enough information that's the handoff between the admins and the end users. Like what are the different space categories that we have? And with those space categories, what do they look like? What is the example templates and what issue types are included? What workflows and what are the details that the end users need to know about these? So that way, if they're requesting a Jira project, they know exactly what kind are available and why they would want that type. For example, this enterprise project category is a template for portfolio and enterprise leadership to track this type of work. So defining that upright, these are the categories that we have defined and what they include. Our Atlassian administration section is where we might have our naming conventions. We would have our run books for the common activities, and this might support our support team as well. We have our change requests and our different maintenance activities, including our yearly housekeeping activities or our sandbox updates. So having all of that Atlassian administration documentation centralized makes it so that when our admin Adam wins that lottery, and you know he will because he plays it regularly, we will then have admin Sally be able to step in and have all of the information available to her to be able to manage the system appropriately. And then we have our governance practices, and this is what we're really talking about here in this webinar. And so we provide these guidance of best practices about decision making as just a freebie handout along with this template. But what we're really talking about is our decision log, our change request process, our support model, our enablement model, and our communications model. And we will work with our clients to help them define those, or you can just define them yourselves, capture what you already have in place, and then you can make improvements and adjust them here and have it centralized documentation for that. And in our decision log, if you're looking at a wild, wild west system, this decision log can help you walk through defining what your future state looks like. You can decide, okay, what are our true product access groups and how they should be organized? What is our hierarchy? What is our space category structure? And then start defining what each of those space categories should be. What are our workflow starting and ending practices? I mean, in an ideal system, you really only need 1 starting status and 2 ending statuses. And this is kind of a soapbox moment here. But why do you need anything more than open and complete or canceled for your starting and ending statuses? Everything else is up for grabs. But I often start getting on that tangent, so I'll shut up. But also your configuration your global configuration settings and your look and feel resolutions, link types, all of these different decisions that you need to make about your system for each of the different project categories. And so then you can decide, build out that baseline system, and then you can plan your archive, transition, migration plan, moving your pilot teams in first, and then all of your other teams, and start retiring the old Wild Wild West. Then you can use that decision log as your change request process. Okay, we got to change. We want a new custom field. We want a new workflow item. And so you can use this decision log and have that information stored. And over time, they'll be able to see full information as to when these decisions were made. You can capture on these decisions why we decided to make those decisions the way we did, the options that we looked at, and the outcome that was decided. And so all of that information is using a simple template straight out of the Atlassian system called the DASI decision log. But I strongly encourage having your governance fully captured in your Confluence environment, or you can use SharePoint or whatever, but Confluence is readily available. So yeah, and so that is our Confluence space guidance. And I will jump into the next slide. So data, really, though, when we talk about data is the new gold, Dietmar, people are selling our data all over the place, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Intended or unintended.
Data truly is the new gold. And so if you don't have access to your data and true visibility and reporting built on that data, and that it's providing consistency and reliable reports to help you make better decisions, then you're not getting the full value out of your gold. Any thoughts on that, Dietmar?
Yeah, I think about resolutions, and this was on another slide earlier. So as you know, in Jira, JSM, you can have not only a workflow status, but you can have a field called resolution where you actually telling Jira JSM why an issue moves to that last status in the workflow, right? Was the work completed? Was it canceled? Is it a duplicate? And you need to be very clear in how you define why an issue was resolved. And that, of course, is a governance topic, right? And that governance topic is driven by a decision as to how you want to analyze the data, right? So you need to decide as a governance group what data you're after, because as we jokingly always say, garbage in, garbage out. So if data is the new gold and you're using collaboration systems such as Jira, JSM, Confluence to collect the data for critical decision making, well, then you need a governance model that allows you to collect the data, which enables decision makers to make decisions. And one example that comes to mind, obviously, for me is resolutions, right? Because you're collecting the data to make decisions, right? Like, for example, if I run a service desk, well, how many times is an issue open and then canceled? Okay, that could give you some insight into the effectiveness of your service desk IT operations, right? So just one example.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, so the closing slide, and then we can open it up for Q&A in the last 10 minutes or so, is Bonnie does a lot of work in that area. In addition to this webinar that we're holding today, Bonnie, why don't you talk a little bit about the workshop and the governance engagements that we're offering?
Well, yeah, so we have some great boot camps. Dietmar teaches a lot of these boot camps for Jira, Jira admins, Confluence, JSM, etc. But we also do have a boot camp centered around governance. And that's really, we use the governance board Confluence space and walk you through a lot of the best practices around governance, and then we actually run through some exercises. If it's a governance workshop that's for your company, then we actually make some decisions about what does a Jira space represent in your organization. and what is the hierarchy that you want to use, and what is the layout of the issue types in your Jira spaces, and walk through many of those decisions. If it's a public boot camp, then we do it about a fictional company called the Acme Anvils and what was it? Acme
Yeah,
Anvils and Explosives or something like that. You know?
I think you invented that. Must be you who invented that,
I
Bonnie.
know, I love the Wiley.
Atlassian will call it the Acme Company. I
Yeah,
think. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
think I'm showing my age here.
yeah.
But then also we have the governance engagements. And we've been performing a lot of governance transformation assessments where we actually review your organization, both a forensic analysis of your tools, your entire system of work, and focused on your Atlassian system, of course, but we also look at the entire system of work. And we do, of course, interviews with your organization experts and stakeholders, and we evaluate, are we following intentional design? Do we have a good support model? Do we have a good enablement model? Do we have a good change management model? And we make recommendations on how to address your governance pain points as well as your end user pain points for what they're getting out of their system. And so that governance transformation assessment is rapidly becoming one of my favorite engagements to be involved in, because that's when we really get to be that, to build that trusted advisor relationship with our clients, and it's truly valuable to be in that.
Awesome. Great. So that concludes the formal agenda that we have prepared. So we would be delighted in helping you, right? What you see on this last slide, Bonnie, if you can just scroll up real quick, is we obviously offer a wide range of services, strategic and tactical. So I personally obviously work as a business transformation consultant, as we mentioned. Kristen, our coordinator, can also post our LinkedIn profile links into the chat. So if you want to connect with us, we'd be delighted to speak with you. So looking also at the question chat here, one topic that always comes up is we talked a lot about what doesn't work. And the concept here, or the idea behind this webinar, is we really want to talk about what does work, right? And what are some of the success stories. And I maybe share one from me, and then I would ask Bonnie to share one as well. As a leader in a very large, yes, heavily focused on governance project office, I was tasked with implementing a governance structure that controlled, yes, the project lifecycle, but also the ongoing sustainment, right? The long-term sustainment of the products that we built. And I just want to share what were some of the nuggets that I took away from that, why it was successful. The first thing is it was very collaborative. We worked very hard to really involve all the stakeholders from the various domains, right? Architecture, security, privacy, data, that they really felt to be represented and included. And the second thing was, and I'll never forget the conversation with my CIO, keep it simple. Especially if I started and it's too burdensome, too complicated, people will be very hesitant to follow. So start simple, right? Build upon it, build on early successes that people really buy in, right? Those were two key nuggets that I took away from that, and I'll never forget that conversation when I presented the first iteration of my governance framework to my CIO and said, "This is absolutely awesome, but make sure you don't make it too cumbersome, otherwise people will just not use it." Bonnie, from your experience?
I always go back to that: people first, then process, then the tools. And I think about, I had the opportunity to work with Tempo last year. Tempo acquired multiple different companies, ALM Works, Liquid Planner, Old Street Solutions. I can't remember all of the different products, but all of them came under tempo and this set them up for their SPM solution. So it's pretty nice, pretty slick. But all these different companies coming together, they all worked in different ways. They all had different ways of working. They all had different Jira systems, different tools, and they had to merge all of those tools, and they had to merge their processes, and they didn't know where to start. And I got to work with them building out their common process. We called it the Tempo Ways of Working Engagement, TWOW. And that we actually, thanks, they put the link to the white paper that we wrote on that. It was a fantastic experience. One of the lessons, though, that came out of that was that it's really critical, reinforced lessons, to start with the process, start with the people in the process first before you actually try to implement it in the tools. Otherwise, you're just creating a whole bunch of rework for yourself.
Yeah, Bonnie and I are both big proponents of a change management model from an organization called Prosci, PROSCI.com. We both love it and we use it extensively in our consulting work. And look up that model, prosci.com. That speaks exactly to what Bonnie just said, right? That you involve people early, raising the awareness, raising the desire, wanting to be part of the change, and only then do you go into enablement. Because if people just show up for training class, not knowing the context, they will obviously ask the question, so what's in it for me, right? Why should I ask somebody else for permission to lead a field? Well, because if you do it without having thought it through, your solution will break. So we really believe in proactive messaging and really include people up front, right? And that is very, very true for governance, right? If you explain the why to folks, they want to be part of it, right? And so we really echo this proactive communication and change management is super important. Okay, with that, we are at time. So thank you very much for having joined us. We really do appreciate it. Hopefully you found this 1 hour conversation on governance helpful to you. If there is anything that we can do to support you in that journey, please do not be shy to reach out. We would be delighted to work with you. And with that, we wish everyone, no matter what time zone you're on, a good evening, good night. And thank you for having joined us. Much appreciated. Thank you, Bonnie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.